Welcome to the Ucommerce Masterclass on pipelines. My name is Soren, and I'm your designated trainer today as we're looking at one of my favorite things of Ucommerce, which are the pipelines themselves. Ucommerce uses pipelines for many different things, and almost every Ucommerce developer will at one point in their career get into touch with these pipelines. It's a system we introduced in the platform in V1 almost 10 years ago, back in 2008. And I'm very proud to say that we've never actually changed this particular subsystem. It was designed, put into place, and remains the same to this day. So that's kind of cool that we were able to design a framework like that. So your question might be, what are pipelines used for in Ucommerce? Well, they're used for a wide range of things, from platform initialization to your front-end website, to rendering backend UI backend logic, and finally order workflow. I'm going to show you what a pipeline looks like, and then we're going to take a look at where the various different pipelines live. So first up, an example of a pipeline. This is the checkout pipeline, which is the pipeline responsible for converting a basket into an order. As you can see, it follows the component outline that we've been looking at in the previous exercise. It has an ID like any other component. It has a type and a service, which have been omitted here for brevity. But what makes a pipeline is this array of tasks that we're looking at here. So the way a pipeline operates is by receiving a payload, which might be an order, it might be a customer, it can be any class basically. And that payload is passed through each subsequent step, which has an opportunity to mutate and work with that payload. So for the checkout pipeline here, it receives in a basket and ultimately turns that basket into an order. So first, we validate that there are some payments made against the order total so that the basket is actually covered by payments. We assign an order number to that basket. We create a customer, we create a member in the CMS for that particular customer, and here we convert the basket into a purchase order. We add audit trails and a bunch of other things, ultimately sending out that confirmation email that you've probably seen a bunch of times. But the beautiful thing is that while this is the default flow that happens when a basket is being converted to an order, it's not the end-all be-all. You can actually extend and modify pipelines, and that's really where they shine. First and foremost, because you can see exactly what's happening. Reading over this should give you a pretty clear idea of what this particular pipeline does. And of course, it enables you to hook into the pipeline. So here's an example of how you would extend a pipeline. You'll notice we're using partial components. So we can actually have these extensions sitting off to the side of the pipeline and hook them in whenever necessary. In this particular case, we're working with the toCompleted order pipeline, which is a pipeline that runs as part of the order processing workflow. And you'll notice here that we're not actually specifying all the steps the pipeline does, because that's already been taken care of. We are only specifying the additional step we want, and we're specifying where we want it hooked in. So when Ucommerce starts up, it finds the pipeline, the original one called toCompleted, and then looks for any partial components that might want to hook into that. In this case, our little configuration here. And then it figures out, well, we want this step inserted as the last one, and we want this particular component to be set up there. There are multiple options for hooking into the pipeline. So we can do last, as is the case here. We can also do first, as you can see. We can also say that we want the component inserted after a specific component ID. So if we wanted something, say, inserted between create customer and create member for customer, we can specify this particular component ID that we want to run after that. We can do the same thing before. So we can also say we want to run before this. And of course, we can remove a component outright. So if we go back and say, you know what, we don't really want to send confirmation emails, we can just remove that particular component with a configuration that sits off to the side. Now, today we're building a little example to show you how to work with pipelines. And the example I have is one where we want to let the merchant know whenever there's a VIP customer in the store. So whenever our basket exceeds a certain value, we want to hook into that particular workflow. The way to do it, of course, is we want to go to Visual Studio, and we're going to open up our solution. So here is our masterclass solution. We have the website running in here. We have the business logic, and of course, Ucommerce running in a console app as well. So the first thing I need to do is add a new pipeline task to our project. And I'm just going to find my pipelines. There we go. And so I'm going to add a new class, which I'm going to call notify. If I can spell, let's just try that one more time. Notify on VIP customer task. So it's usually we suffix with what the type is. So I just call it a task to denote that it's actually a pipeline task. And we'll create that class here. So we need to hook into the pipelines that calculate the totals. And let's just take a look at those. So we'll jump into Ucommerce. You can see the pipeline folder here. The pipelines that sit right here at the root of the pipeline folder, they're the ones that you're typically most interested in. They relate to the website itself, all the actions that are happening here. And we use a little namespace in front of it. So everything that has something to do with baskets is prefixed with baskets. Same thing with catalogs and customers and orders and so forth, just to give you a little easier time. Now, the pipeline we're interested in is the one called basket. The basket pipeline has the responsibility of recalculating the totals of the orders. So it's a very appropriate place to hook in for us, as we're interested in the total of the basket whenever it exceeds a particular threshold. So let's just take a look at the basket pipeline here real quick. So you can see it has a lot of stuff, lots of steps it's going through. You can see here all the steps. It is quite a lot, but basically what it's all about is, calculating the details on the lines, summing all that up, and so on and so forth. Shipments and payments, all of that is calculated in here. And for us, it's really appropriate to hook in, right here at the end of the pipeline, because that's when everything's done and we have the value we're looking for. So that's what we're going to do. Now, we need to implement an interface here called iPipeline. Oh, let me just spell properly here. iPipeline task of purchase order. Like that. We'll import Ucommerce entities v2, and we need the pipelines interface as well. So we got the namespace as pipelines, which is where the iPipeline task lives. We got the purchase order, which live inside the entity v2 namespace. And of course, the pipeline has a one method called execute, where it receives the payload, so the purchase order. And you may wonder how I actually worked out that it was a purchase order that I needed. So let's just skip back to the pipeline definition real quick so you can see. So if I scroll to the top of this file, you'll notice here that we have the component with an ID like always. We have the service and a type. But here you'll notice that we have actually a generic argument specified. So this is the XML way of specifying that. So we have the first generic argument, and it's denoted using these two brackets. And you can see here that it's the purchase order that lives in that namespace we were using before, and in the Ucommerce DLL. So that translates directly to this and that. So that's how I knew. Now, once we've done this pipeline will actually just execute as part of the flow. So we need to return a pipeline execution result, and we need to tell it whether everything went well or not, like that. Good. So what we need to do now is we need to figure out if this order here, or this basket that we're looking at, has actually exceeded the threshold we want. So I'm going to create an if statement here, and I'm going to take a look at the subject. Maybe, let's see, subject, and the order total. of that subject, and I believe it's a nullable verb type here, so we'll just do this. Get value at default, so we're sure to get a value, and let's just specify 500 as the threshold. So once we exceed that, we're gonna do what we need, right? And what I want to do here is I want to send out an email. That's the simplest way we have to notify a merchant. So we have a system in Ucommerce called the email system, which is, I know, cleverly named. And the email system is basically for notifications, transactional emails like this one. And so what I can do is I can use that email system to reach out, given a type here. But I need to set it up first. So we'll just leave Visual Studio for now, and we'll go to the CMS. And I'm using Umbraco here as the CMS of choice for this particular exercise, but it works exactly the same in Sitecore, Kentico, and Sitefinity. So same apps, same functionality, no difference. So I'll navigate to the settings area of Ucommerce and into the email area. And you'll notice we have these types here, email types, and they are really the types of notifications we can send out, right? So I'm going to create a new type that I'm calling, I think I want to call it VIP or something to that effect. There we go. So we have another type to work with, and then we need to select on that type which email to actually send out. So we'll just refresh this. There we go, and we have the VIP one. So who should be the sender? Ucommerce masterclass in this case here, and we'll just do, I'm just going to use my email address here as the sender. And of course we can CC and BCC, we can comma separate if we want. Now the system is of course multilingual, so we can just set up different subjects for different languages, which has already been done, but more importantly, we can also select the email template. So this would be a piece of content inside of Ucommerce, well, inside the CMS rather, and we are just going to grab the front page of our store. It doesn't really matter so much what we're sending, and I'm just going to do the same thing for UK English, so everybody's happy. On both sides of the pond, there we go. So we have a new email type here. This is connected to the store in question up here. The email profile is connected to the store right there. And basically it's just going to select one of these, and you can see the email profile right there. It's the default one, which we were editing for. So we can actually have different look and feel on transactional emails if you want. Not so important for this particular exercise. So the email is set up, and we can go back here and start working with it. So to get at the email system, we need to use constructor injection to get at that particular thing. So I'm going to create a new constructor. And in that constructor, because all this is dependency injected, I can ask for an email service. Like that. We just need to import the proper namespace, Ucommerce transactions. There we go. And we will create a field for this. So we have the email service to work with. Ucommerce orchestrates all this, so you don't have to worry about it. If you need to get at other functionalities, you can just ask for it in the constructor, and Ucommerce will give it to you. Now, back to our pipeline method here, and we're in that situation where we're above the threshold of 500, so we need to send an email. So we'll call the email service and go send, and we'll see what it needs. So you'll see here that the send method requires a few different things to work: an iLocalization context, an email profile, the name of the email type, that's the one we just set up in the back end, whom we should address the email to, and some template parameters, which are custom inputs for the email we can use. So I'm going to show you how to find all that. So first and foremost, the iLocalization service. Well, whenever you see something with an I in front of it, you need to think, well, I can just ask Ucommerce for that, just like the email service up here. So we're just going to ask for an iLocalization service, and I'll tell you in a little bit what it does. Localization service, like that. We'll just import the proper namespace, which was not that. Just want to make sure we get the Ucommerce one. Let's just see what it is we need. Oh, it's an iLocalization context. Good, we'll import that like so. We'll initialize the field like that. So, and I'm just going to pass that in here, localization context. So the localization context is responsible for figuring out which language your website is currently speaking of, so we can send out localized emails. So we want to make sure that we pick out the right content for the customer given their language. And that's what this one does. The next thing is we need an email profile. And if you remember, this is what we set up on the store. So let me just go back to the store and show you real quick. Right there, we have the email profile, right? So we need a way of finding the current store, and fortunately, we have a catalog context that can do that. So we'll just ask for another thing up here. I'll just break this up a little bit to make it easier to read. And we will ask for the iCatalog, catalog context. Like that. Just make sure we import the Ucommerce runtime namespace, and then we create a field like that so we can use the catalog context. So we can do email profile here, email profile. We can ask the catalog context that we just asked for, what is the current store, and on that, what is the email profile, so we can get at that information that we were just looking at in the back end. Now we can take that, pass it to the to the email service, and now the email type name. And that was the thing we set up in the backend before. So let me just skip back and show you that. So here we defined a new type, email type. We called it VIP. So I'm just going to grab that value, copy that, and switch back to Visual Studio and type it in. Paste it in, of course. There we go. Now, whom we should send the email to. So that would be the merchant itself. So we're just going to hard code that particular address. So I'll just send it to myself in this case, but we can store as a configuration or something like that. Good. And now the template parameters. So the template parameters are a set of key values that you can pass in and use in the email content. And just so you can see how it works, I'm going to create, a dictionary and pass it in so you can see how that works. So we're going to create an dictionary of a key that is a string and a value that's also a string, and we'll call it template parameters. And we'll new up a new dictionary of string as the key and string as the value. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add one value in here. We'll call it order value, for example. And that will actually be turned into a value for the email. And so we'll do subject. So that's the order we're currently, or the basket we're currently working on. Order total, get value or default. Like that. We'll go to string, so we have that. And we can then pass that on to this one here. So order template parameters. So the way this works in I think all the CMSs is that when we configure content on the email profile, what we do is to get that content for the email, we will actually do a request for the page that was set up, and we will send in these values as query string parameters so they can be used on the template to do the dynamic aspects of the email. So that's basically what happens. You get this into a question mark equals value in the URL, and then you can start to use that in the email. That's basically it. All right. So with that, we have the email set up. I have a little server running down here. It's called SMTP for dev that you can install. So it just intercepts those email calls so we can see the messages. It can be Googled if you need it. And we're good to go. So the last thing we need is to register this thing. So obviously we'll get it into a DLL, but Ucommerce doesn't yet know where to actually execute it. So we need to do that partial component we looked at before to notify Ucommerce where we want this to run. So I'll open up my website. I'll find my Ucommerce folder and my apps folder, and I'm going to open my pipelines folder here, and I'm just going to copy an existing file like that, and I'll call this one notify on VIP customer config, like that. Good. So what I need now is I need to define a partial component that will target the basket pipeline from before. And so fortunately, I know inside of Ucommerce that we already have an app that does that. So I'm going to go to the apps folder. I'm going to go to the acquire and cancel payments because they already work with pipelines in the way I want. I'm just going to open up one of these, and I'll copy the partial component like that. Stick it in here. And of course I need to target a different ID. So I'll find the ID of my basket from before. So I'll go back to my pipelines folder and I'll open up the basket configuration again. We can see the ID is basket right there. So I'm just going to grab that, insert that here. So now our partial component is set up to target the basket pipeline. I want my task to run as the last one, so that's fine. And then I need to work this out. So this is what we call a component ID reference. So when you have a $sign and a squiggly bracket, it basically refers to another component. So I need to register the class that I did over here as well, so I can refer to it. So I'm going to go back to my basket pipeline, and I'm going to grab one of these. These point to a bunch of existing components. I'm just going to scroll down to find one of them, the first one down here. So this is exactly what I need. So I'll just copy that. Like so. And I'm going to prefix it. So when I'm doing apps and when I'm doing new tasks that don't, or new components that didn't exist in Ucommerce before, it's important that we prefix it with the namespace of the app you're doing so that the IDs don't clash. So I'm just gonna prefix it with master class, and I'm going to call this one notify on VIP customer. The service I'm going to leave alone because that targets that pipeline interface that we were implementing before. And of course the payload is the order itself, so we just need that to be compatible with this particular component. And then we need to change the type to point to our new one. So first I'm going to find the namespace of the component we were doing. So I'll just go back to our class, scroll up to the top here and copy paste the namespace to ensure I'm not doing it wrong, right? So I'll just paste that in like that. So that's the namespace, and then I need my type. So the class itself, that's this one here. So I'm just going to copy that as well, paste that in like that, and then I need the DLL. So usually the DLL, so my class is over here, so it's in this project. Usually there's a correlation between the project and the DLL, but sometimes that can be changed. So it's always a good idea to do properties on your project and see what the actual assembly name is, just to make sure that you don't have an interesting error there. Good. So my new component is set up, ready to be put into my partial component. So I'm going to grab the ID, and I'm going to put that into the component reference up here to make sure that this one here executes as the last step of the basket pipeline, and that ties everything together. So I'm going to build my project, which will push over my changes. And hopefully we should see as we start to add to basket that we are able to send that email once we reach the threshold. So let's go back to our website right here. We'll go to the root of the website. There we go. So let's just check out my basket right now. So it's empty. So we shouldn't receive any emails just now. What we can do though is we can attach a debugger here and see if our task is actually being executed. So I'm just going to add in a breakpoint like that, and I'm going to attach to my debugger. There we go. And I'll start adding some things to my basket. There we go. So we're currently adding an item and we're looking at the order total. So let's see what that is. So it's right now it's 205, which of course is less than 500. So we shouldn't actually reach our code here. So let's just dive to that. Yep. And we can do it one more time, and that should not trigger the code either. And then a last time, which should get us above the threshold. There we go. So we're asking that catalog context where we are on the website right now, which store are we actually in? And we're asking that store which email profile we have. So that should lead us to that email profile we set up. Next, we're setting up the templates parameters. So the value, which is 617.55. Then the localization context. Let me just show you. You can see here how it's actually providing us the locale that we need. And we're getting that email. So we'll go into SMTP for dev, which is pinging us down here. We can see we actually got an email there once we targeted that. Good. Now, one more thing that I wanted to show you here is that right now we have hard-coded a few values. We have this, we have the name of the email type that we're sending out, which may or may not be fine. It could be. We have the email of the person to receive it, which could actually be set up as a configuration. And we have the threshold, which definitely probably is going to change. Definitely, probably. It might change, right? So what would be cool is if we could change this into a configuration value that could be added in via the component we just set up. And fortunately we can, because what we can do is we can set up a public property here, just to give you a sense of how that could be done, with an, let's call it a decimal on there. And we'll call it VIP threshold. Just do getter and setter, and we'll set it to something just to make sure, right? So we have this, and this would actually give us the same thing. I'll just change this out, VIP threshold. So the refactoring here doesn't actually change anything, but we are able to start to target this particular property from our configuration on the config. So let's just go back to the configuration here, down there. And what I can do here is, this is the class that I added that on, is I can open up my component here, and I can add in a parameters element. And what I can do is I can take the name of my property here and insert that as a new element to that, and specify a new threshold of, say, 600. So what happens is that this will be read by Ucommerce when you start up, and then once this particular component is initialized, the value here will be overridden with the configured value. So let's just try that out. So push over all my code. Open up the website. And I'm going to add a breakpoint while we're waiting for that, just to make sure. There we go. So we'll attach the debugger so we can see whether that change actually occurred. So I'll go to my basket, and in there I can modify the value. So we should actually be able to force through a recalculation here. like that. So we'll update the basket, and hopefully we will hit our breakpoint. Now let's see what the value of threshold is, shall we? So it defaults to 500, but we set up 600 in the configuration over here. So let's see. And indeed it does say 600, as you can see. So with that, you've actually opened up your code a little bit and are able to, you know, not be as tightly bound to the choices you made building the component. So just a little cool little extra thing you can do with the version of control container. Right, so let's do a real quick recap here of what we did. So we set up a new email profile here, or new email type called VIP. On that VIP email profile, we set up the content on the individual languages, so we could actually specify what the email should look like. We verified that the store here is set up to point to this particular email profile of default. Could be any other one. Then in Visual Studio, we went and created a new class called Notify VIP customer task. In that task, we're using the email service injected, of course, to send out an email. That email service requires a localization context, which we added in, and we needed the catalog context to figure out what the current email profile is right there. Then we set up some template parameters for the email just to show you how that could be done, order value and the total of the order that can then be used in the email content. And then we send out the email. Finally, we set up the VIP threshold to be a configurable property. So it's just a regular old property on the component itself. And it's then targetable from our class or our component set up right here. Of course, we registered our component as a parcel component for basket, and we're executing that as the last bit. And we looked up the ID of the basket on the basket pipeline configuration, which is found right here in the pipelines folder in Ucommerce. And finally, we refer to our component that we set up via ID, this one here, and that makes everything tie together. Right, so now it's time to go hands-on yourself. You are looking for exercise 1030 in the handouts that you received. In there you'll find steps to complete. So go ahead and set aside some time now and hit the pause button. Once you're done, we'll be back with a summary of everything. And we're back. I hope you enjoyed getting your hands dirty with pipelines. Still one of my very favorite subsystems of Ucommerce, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. So pipelines in Ucommerce are used for a bunch of different things, like initialization of the platform. Apps tend to use that to migrate themselves or do whatever they need to do whenever the platform starts. We use it to generate UIs in the back end. We use it to deal with order workflow. We use for the APIs, everything. So pipelines are really a central extension point in Ucommerce, and one that I know a lot of developers enjoy. I hope you did too. Thank you for being part of this part of the masterclass. I hope to see you again soon.